So this is the Acropolis. We're here looking up at it. Acropolis, I just learned, means edge of the city. Acrophobia is something we use in English to mean fear of the edge, like fear of falling off edges. So here we are at the Acropolis. It is the second highest rock in Athens. So it's overlooking the city. It has water on top. Fresh springs get up there, so it's a good natural fortress. Unlike the other one, it's a little bit too steep. I can't see it from here, or I would show you. But this is like the best fortified spot. So ever since Athens started, this has been the fortress, and they built up the walls around it and have built and made it a kind of sacred space on top. Welcome to the birthplace of a lot of things. We're going to talk about how Greek mythology came from, has influenced so much of our culture. But this is the place where they worship Dionysus. Dionysus was the god of a lot of things, but primarily wine. And the reason they worship him here is because wine is something that makes you act like somebody else if you drink too much of it. Acting was something else that made you act, obviously act like somebody else. And so he was also the god of acting. And this was where they worshipped him. That seat over there, kind of a throne-looking like seat, was the place where the priest would sit. And right down here is where the actors would sit. What you can see here is where people would sit, but it also continued all the way up to the gates up there and up to the hill. So this whole thing was a huge stadium. The first theater, where the first plays were performed. They did tragedies, they did comedies, they did dramas, and they had competitions. And so for 3 days they'd have this festival of Dionysus. They would have plays, and whoever kind of had the best play out of the 3 days, they would award a tripod to that person. And they'd actually award it not to the actors like they would for the Oscars or for the director, but they'd award it to the sponsor, whoever paid for it. So they recognized, this is a money-making thing. Also, this was just a place where people would gather. So this was actually quite a big influence on the democracy, because this is where people came together and gathered. One other thing on that, we're not going to take you there in video, but the Agora is a marketplace that we got to visit yesterday, and that's another place where kind of democracy happened, because, well, it's not the official spot, that's where people gathered and talked and kind of spread the news of what was going on and kind of formed consensus and formed common opinions. We do that now through talking, through marketplace, but especially through media. But this is kind of the media of the day, was the theater. And to this day, theater is something that people use to comment politically and to kind of gather people together and celebrate, and not, though, to worship a god, but that's what they used to do here. This is the sanctuary of Asclepios, which sounds like I have a bad lesson. So Asclepios was Apollo's son. He learned healing and all kinds of natural herbs and stuff from a centaur. Because Apollo didn't raise him, because none of the gods were that great as parents. So Apollo gave him to a centaur to raise. The centaur taught him healing, and Apollo was so proud of him that he made him the god of healing. Kind of gave his power to him. So Asclepios was the god of healing, and they built this as a sanctuary, a place of healing. It also had its own, well, not this, but most of the sanctuaries of Asclepios, there were many of them, had their own actual theaters, because they thought that part of healing, the process of healing, was healing of the soul, having fun, learning to kind of relax, as well as healing of the body. So this was a small temple or sanctuary compared to most. But why we're here is because I want to talk just quickly about, once again, Greek mythology has influenced our culture. Our concept of healing comes from, first, even the idea of hospitals, the idea of having a sanctuary comes here from the Greeks. And his daughter, Asclepios' daughter's name was Hygienia, from which we get the word hygienics, or hygiene. So even our language, just in that example and many others, and our health, and our healthcare system has been influenced by Greek mythology and Greek tradition. We are finally here, the Parthenon. This is the coolest building up here, the most kind of important. This is a temple to Athena. Also, a little bit later, I'll show you the Erechtheion, which is another temple to Athena. The whole of Athens is dedicated to Athena, so hence the name. But this is a especially cool temple. Just so many things about it, but first thing, it's huge. I mean, I don't know if you can see the perspective here, but each pillar, I couldn't find maybe two of me to get my arms around the pillars, and probably a little bit more. It's 70 meters tall, something like that, super tall. This is Athens is the birthplace of our art and architecture, Western art and architecture. So these pillars here, if you see, they're very simple and straight. They are brilliantly done. You can see some of these are crumbling. Some of the better ones, you can't tell that they are different bricks, different parts to them. They're so closely put together. Earthquakes and many years of this being a fortress with bombs hitting it have jarred the pillars a bit. But meanwhile, I want to show you another pillar you can't see super well, but over here there are Ionic pillars, a different type of pillar. Those ones, the simple ones, were Doric. These are Ionian, and they have little curls like scrolls at the top. They say that they're decorated a little bit like the sea, so that was a type of architecture that came more from the coast. And then over here you can see, actually they took the pillars and they created statues for each of the pillars. So these women are holding up the roof, and so it's a beautiful, beautiful work of art. We're here at the backside of the Parthenon to talk about humanism. Greek mythology and culture has influenced us in so many ways, and one more is humanism. It's kind of the start of it. So this is the, I forget the official name, but you can kind of see where the roof would have been, where the roof had been and has broken down. On that front, there's statues, just a bunch of statues. You can see a few of them there. And those were all of the gods. There are two different stories on each side. Both have Athena. One has Zeus, one has Poseidon, kind of, making everyone happy, while still honoring Athena most of all. But while this temple features the gods primarily, right behind there's the second layer. And so this was like a columns around it, like a porch area. And then behind would have been the wall and an actual doorway. It's obviously open now, the wall's fallen down, but they're reconstructing some of it. Now, the frieze there, that's a artwork that kind of stands out from the rock, that's carved out of the rock, is of everyday Athenians doing what they do with, farming, bringing food into the market, playing with their children. That is astonishing that the Greeks would be so bold as to, even in a back part, put themselves on the temple to say, we are worshiping the gods, but we're here too. And very simply said, the Greeks were the first, intentionally or not, to take the gods and make them look human and make them kind of people we could relate to. The Egyptian gods, for instance, would not be the kind of people you'd want to meet in that back alleyway. In fact, if you saw them anywhere, you'd be freaked out because it's like, oh my gosh, that guy has a bird's head. They're creepy monsters that they worshipped out of fear. But the Greeks were the first to kind of take these gods and make them like themselves in their own image. I'm not going to say that's a good influence on our culture necessarily, but it is one, and it's a strong one. There's good and bad to it. And humanism has since been the kind of cultural basis of Western civilization. So Athens is dedicated to Athena. It's obvious by the name. But why is it dedicated to Athena, and why are there two temples to Athena up on the Acropolis? Well, this is the Temple of the Erechtheion. It was the most holy place in Athens and on the Acropolis. Kind of the Holy of Holies in a sense. There's a story that accompanies this. First, I want to point out, I mentioned the Doric pillars, the simple pillars of the Parthenon. Well, the Erechtheion had of more Ionic, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, pillars, and they have scrolls kind of looking like waves of the sea, so you can see that a little bit better up here. But I want to talk about this hole here. So there's a hole in the floor, and there's a hole in the roof of this temple. And those weren't mistakes. That wasn't a cannonball that came in later. That was built that way. And there's a reason for it. So the story is that Athens, before it was named Athens, was a very small city-state, kind of different groups of people, tribes that all lived around this protective rock. It didn't have any sort of real unity. But it started to unify, and they said, we need a patron goddess or god. We need somebody to kind of support us and help us, and someone to, even be named after. And so they decided to seek a patron, and not only one, but two gods showed up wanting to help, Poseidon and Athena. And so instead of they were like afraid, oh, we're gonna have a war. Poseidon and Athena are gonna fight. They always fight anyway. And this is going to be bad for us. So they said, how can we get the best from this? They said, well, how about we have a contest? So each god gave them a gift. Poseidon struck his trident from the sky into the earth and cut a hole right through that temple into the ground. And out of it sprung a well of water. And so like, this is awesome. We have a fortress and now we have water. Like, we'll always have water. This is great. And they drank it, and it was seawater. Salty, because Poseidon is the god of the sea. So that's kind of a terrible gift, right? So then Athena throws her spear and strikes it into the ground, and out sprouts an olive tree. And from that they have the olive oil they're famous for, the olive that kind of runs their economy. And so hence they chose Athena and worship Athena, and ever since they've had a shortage of water.
And there's the olive
Only
tree.
salt water. What was that?
And there's the olive tree.
Yes, so the olive tree is there on the other side. You can see it. It's not the original olive tree that Athena planted. Maybe.
Come
maybe.
on.
And hence they named this place Athens after her. So Athens is not only the birthplace of, let's see if I can remember all of them, art, architecture, theater, health and healthcare, medicine, language, for so many things. It is also the birthplace of democracy, and is very famous for that. This is the Greek flag. You can see many other flags have flown here. More recently, the Nazi flag, again, not too recently, but we're talking ancient history, was flown here when they took over during the 40s. The Turks took over for a long time. The British were in charge for a while. A lot of people have taken Athens over, but now the Greek flag flies here. Democracy is here again, but it began a long time ago. A King Theseus is claimed to be the one who started it. He defeated the Minotaur, and that's a whole story we can get into at some point. And he returned to Athens, and as a gift to the people, he gave them power. He kind of slowly gave away his power and set up this democracy that has influenced the world since. They actually allowed men and women to vote at first. There were certain rules on who could vote, kind of what class of citizen you were, but if you were a citizen, you could vote. But then when they chose Athena over Poseidon, they voted on it, and Athena won by one vote, and that was because apparently, according to mythology, all the women voted for Athena, all the men voted for Poseidon. There's one more woman than man. So while they have been Athens ever since, the result was that they had a shortage, consistently have a shortage of water, and the group said that the reason for that was it was a bad choice by the women, so they didn't allow women to vote after that. So hence hundreds of years of women not voting until more recently. So thanks, Athens, but they gave us democracy. We are here climbing the Hill of the Muses, or as the sign back there said, the Hill of the Mouses. Not correct. Bad translation. And once again we see something that comes from Greek mythology. The word music, the word muse, to amuse, all that comes from the idea of the 9 muses, who are the goddesses of the arts. We are severely influenced by Greek art and architecture. Music is one of those areas we don't know, because the Athenians may have had a way of recording music, we don't know, and we don't understand recorded music. We don't get any sort of way of writing down musical notation until the Renaissance. But the word muse and music comes from ancient Greek mythology, and chestnuts are good. Here we are at Delphi. You can see down there's pillars of the Temple of Apollo, where the Oracle of Delphi would breathe in the volcanic vapors and give prophecies that people would come see. The temple is made of stone rather than marble. It's like a lesser quality type of stone, and so though it's newer slightly than the Parthenon, it's fallen down. There's a lot of other things around here, a stadium up that way, and a theater, but this was the centerpiece, and people would come from all over Greece, especially from Athens and Corinth and Sparta, come here for processing. This oracle features prominently in mythology. Oedipus came here and got the prophecy that led him to kill his father and marry his mother and all that. You can see the setting is just beautiful and how it would be a place of awe. But I want to talk about how Greece is the birthplace of Western philosophy. So the first philosophers and the most important, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, all would have come to Delphi here to visit the oracle to see, and they would have rejected that. They still believed, like the Greeks believed, they still had that culture of humanism, and yet they rejected the gods and the darkness and instead sought light and enlightenment through philosophy.